It's a sultry summer night in the city of fearmongers, and while decent citizens sleep the sleep of the innocent, fungal infections spread through the surrounding wilderness, and cursed canisters of sinister celluloid seek out their next unwitting victim. I mean audience. Remember, you heard it on here first, dear fearmongers. On the prowl, on the DL, and very spooky ooky. And I am your host, Clay McLeod Chapman, and oh my God, it is a sweaty summer night. I don't know where you are or what time you are or what's happening where you're listening to this, but it is muggy here in Brooklyn, New York. So thank you for sweating with me. The perspiration is real, folks. Tonight we have an amazing pairing. I have been dying for this. It's these are two of my favorite books that I've read this summer, this year. So like I feel very spoiled and a little nervous. So I'm gonna get mealy mouthed and tongue tied all night. But author of Girl in the Creek, we have none other than Wendy N. Wagner. Hello, Wendy. How are you doing?
I'm so good. This is so fun already.
Has anyone ever asked what the N stands for?
No one ever asks. It's wild.
Really? Oh my God. What's the N stand for, Wendy? It's a
It stands
secret.
for
I'm not gonna tell you.
Noel. I
Get
was
out.
born in December, so I guess Christmas was on my mom's mind.
Wow. There you go. Truly has been a mystery for me for so long. And I was like, am I gonna ask? And I was like, well, here we are. Oh my God. Author of Black Flame. We have none other than Gretchen Felker-Martin. Gretchen, holy moly, how are you doing this week before the release of Black Flame?
Thanks so much, Clay. I'm doing really well. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, you say that now. The night is young. Um, I, I just, I, I don't know why I'm anxious, but I feel like it's like you read some books and they kind of move you in such a way that you kind of want to honor them and respect them to such a degree that it's like we're giving them their just due. And I'm gonna whiff it because I feel like I'm gonna Chris Farley the whole night of just like what why did you feel this or where did this come from and it's just because I love them and I love them for very specific reasons. And I guess, beyond the kind of pairing of you both being Nightfire authors, both of you kind of pushing what I feel is the kind of limits of like what horror and kind of horror lit and the genre is kind of capable of doing on the page. I feel like there's a lot to kind of unpack in both Girl in the Creek and Black Flame. So I think I kind of want to ask a kind of bifurcated question up front to both of you, because I feel like I'm curious if it how it feeds into your specific writing. And
Bifurcate away.
um, Gretchen, you started as a critic, and Wendy, you started and continue to be an editor. And and Gretchen, I guess I want to kind of do a quick follow-up of like, are you still a critic? And is that as a film critic or a literary critic or both?
I'm still a critic. I work for myself now, and it's almost entirely film. I will occasionally talk about a book if I feel it's both really special and really underread, but by and large, film. I cover new movies, I cover classics, I cover whatever happens to be on my mind.
I'm just now remembering. I'm curious if you're still kind of doing the series. I think it may have been for a Patreon account, or that you would kind of host screenings and or at least kind of speak specifically to films that you were kind of watching in the time of like, here's this movie, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I still do that. We hang out together in the Deadlights Theater, which is the Discord that I run, and It's a combination of people who are interested in film and members from my Patreon. Um, and I do have a standing policy. If you're trans, you can just ask to join and I'll send you an invitation. Um, and we watch movies together and I moderate discussions during, and it's almost unbelievably peaceful for an online gathering of, more than 200 people.
It's possible, is what you're saying. It can
Every
happen.
once in a while.
The blue moon is shining. But as far as being a film critic, then we're, I mean, if all roads kind of lead to Black Flame, then how does your kind of film criticism kind of play into or kind of feed into this book in particular?
Well, it gives me a lot of opportunities to describe the mechanics of a film, both in terms of making it and in terms of what the finished product looks like. And I never get tired of talking about the mechanics of film. I'll tell anyone who wants to listen that my favorite shot in all of cinema is the scene in Boogie Nights where they're filming a pornographic film, and in the middle of the scene we switch to a view from inside the camera where we can see it playing out upside down in miniature as the film moves through the machinery, and it's just like this incredible, almost religious moment that you see light and sound
Yeah.
becoming art.
You kind of mentioned that moment, and it's like I have that reflection. I'm remembering that specific moment and that specific scene in that film, and just yeah, it's there. I because they have to change the film canister, right? Like they kind of
Right.
lean in and they're like, we have to. What is I'm forgetting the kind of proper term, but it's like we have to switch reels,
Yeah.
and you kind of go into it. Um, well, now I have to ask the follow-up question of like, can you guide us through those kind of first formative film going moments for you? Like, what was it, like a particular film that you saw that kind of flipped the switch, or was film just always there?
I would say there are a couple big moments for me. When I was very young, I was a real dinosaur fanatic, and I begged and begged and begged and begged and begged to be allowed to watch Jurassic Park. And I'm, maybe 6 years old at this point. And finally, my parents cave. And of course, I have terrible, terrible nightmares about the raptors in the kitchen for months. And also, I insist on watching it over and over and over and over again. So this is a really early example of how much I love to be in discomfort and in proximity to something that is frightening and dysregulating me.
Yeah.
Uh, the other one, this was, I think, just after college. My friend Danny, who was just a real raconteur, huge cinephile, showed me Sunset Boulevard for the first
Hmm.
time.
Wow.
And I was just sitting there completely stunned that you could do any of this with a movie. Because, of course, at this time in my life, I've already seen hundreds of movies. I've even seen some old movies. But to go back and watch what Billy Wilder was doing right in the middle of the century and this incredible, still basically flawlessly modern feeling film really blew the whole thing wide open for me.
Yeah.
It made me feel like there was a language that I could learn here.
And it's interesting, and I'm gonna ask a kind of obvious question. Forgive me, but it's like I'm curious why then not kind of veer towards screenwriting or kind of the architecture of storytelling by way of filmmaking as opposed to analysis and criticism, like kind of being able to take this specific route as opposed to you know either being in front of the camera or kind of working on the story itself.
Well, Clay, if I were to do that, it would involve talking to a lot of people. And
True. True.
I am not a great collaborator. I find it frustrating and unintuitive. And to be frank, I don't enjoy it nine
Yeah.
times out of 10. So I went where my inclinations took me. Um, I think in some ways I want to preserve my relationship to film.
Hmm.
You know, it might be analytical. I might have lots of thoughts and feelings about not just individual films, but film as a whole, as an art form and an industry. But I still come to it as a moviegoer,
Yeah.
and that feels really special to me. I love to be in the dark with something new.
So then to write about film making, film preservation, film, like the kind of revival of celluloid, and in this case, a very particular film. Uh, was it always like, oh, I can't wait to write my cursed film book, or like I guess I'm curious, like, was this always like, were we always going towards Black Flame? Like, was this an idea that you've had for a while, or was it that this is the moment for Black Flame?
It was actually an idea that I had very late in the process of picking a third book. Um,
Really? Wow.
yeah, it had never occurred to me, which is crazy because I love cursed film movies and books too. I'm such a huge fan of Gemma Files' experimental film, which is
Yes.
such a
Yes.
beautiful book. Um, but it just sort of popped out at me. Oh, I could do something like this. I could use the language of cinema that I've built up an understanding of over the years and make something that is unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, there's a character who is a film critic in the book, and just, thinking about like the kind of the preservation of film criticism in of itself as something to like, hold on to and be kind of very kind of near and dear as newspapers at large are just like just crush like killing it. Yeah,
Yes,
I
it's
was
not
gonna
just
ask
a
like, sorry.
dying art, it's actively being murdered.
Yeah. I had a question of like, why set this book in the 80s? And then I had a kind of my own answer of like, well, you can't have a film critic that like kind of exists and thrives in this way today. So I don't think that's the answer, but that was the kind of
It's
immediate
definitely
response.
part of it. That
Yeah.
character doesn't make any sense even as early as 2000. You know, it was Roger Ebert, Pauline Kael, and then I guess like Matt Seitz and Mo Ryan, but almost no one.
Yeah. I mean, even like I was thinking of Ratatouille of all, like I was like, when is
Oh,
like the foil of a crit, like when has a character been a critic, or like Lady in the Water? Like what is the just you have the kind of the archetype of the critic, whether it's culinary, literary, theatrical, like and what that brings to the table. But I'll table that for now because I
I
have
will
to
say
ask.
briefly, I have never hated anything in my life. Like I hate that goddamn monologue in Ratatouille.
Oh my God. I don't know. I, do you remember the tone? Like, I can't even, like, what does he even say in that? I'm
So it's the
blanking.
critic speaking to the viewer or to the public and within the fiction, and he speaks at length about how sometimes the critic just needs to get out of the way and let the purity of the art come
Oh
to
my
the
God.
masses. And by the end of it, I just want to beat his face in. You
Oh
know,
my God.
it's a guy who doesn't understand why he even exists.
Oh God. And he does it kind of like you see like almost his pick, like the kind of animated eye kind of lean more towards the camera and like look at the audience and
Right.
just like, the moment is like, ah, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, for a movie where a rat controls a guy by yanking on his hair, that's what the animators are doing in that scene. They're like, we're so important. We're so important.
Step aside, Pauline. Um, Wendy, I have to ask, like, the bifurcation is that like I this is it your sixth novel or seventh novel?
Sixth book, yeah.
Sixth book, okay. And in that time, you are the editor-in-chief at Nightmare Magazine. And this is, the kind of these two roads, they run parallel to one another, and every so often I have to imagine they merge and or intersect, and it's the kind of the editorial mind and the writerly mind. And I mean, my first question is just like, what is the conversation that you were having with yourself of like, okay, I'm gonna write my book now, and it's like, oh, but now the editor's talking to me and like talking like, is there a discussion that's happening that is uh artistically nurturing, or is it somehow self-sabotaging? Like how does editor Wendy speak to writer Wendy?
Well, I feel like I'm really lucky that I've worked as like an editor as long as I have. I mean, I've been doing it professionally for the last like 11 years. And I kind of realized at a certain point in the process of being an editor, I was like, oh, when I work with other writers, like I'm very nice. I'm very encouraging. I'm always trying to look at things from like this lens of like, what are you trying to do? How can we make it work better for you? And, I just kind of realized at a certain point, like, I would never, like, me editing me, I was like, wait a minute, you would never talk like that to another writer. Like, maybe you should, like, treat yourself like the people that you work with. And actually, I think it made like a huge swing in like my productivity because I just like, I went from like, I love drafting, right? Like, that's so fun. But I've always sort of like, oh, the editing part was always a slog. And
Yeah.
I feel like when I kind of like shifted that perspective, it made a big difference because then instead of just like, sitting with like the meanest possible version of myself who's like, here's my red pen, I'm going to catch every mistake, that kind of thing. It was more of a collaborative experience. And yeah, I think it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when you turn in your draft to your editor, is it, do you, like, is there this expectation of like, you're going to be the editor that I want you to be, like be the editor that you are, be the editor that you want to be the editor to me in my book that I
I
am to
gotta
other
say,
authors.
like every editor that I've worked with has just been so nice. Like, for Girl in the Creek, I got to work with Kelly Lonesome at Tor Nightfire. Yeah,
Oh my
My
God.
girl.
yeah, she's just like so nice, like absolutely a delight and super smart and supportive and kind. And yeah, in general, I mean, usually every editor I've had has just been like really happy. Also, I don't know, maybe because I am an editor, my manuscripts are pretty clean. They usually say things like, "Oh, it's so clean. I love working with you." Although Kelly had a lot of work on her hands. There's like a lot of parts where she's like, "This could be scarier," or "Do they really need to be hiking again? Maybe that scene." Maybe that doesn't, maybe this time they just don't need to be lost in the woods. Like, okay, fine. We'll take out some hiking. But yeah, in general, I feel like most editors are like, they're like there because they love it. It's not you don't, as an editor, you rarely find yourself in situations where people are like, "Ooh, you're an editor. You're so amazing." You're not in it for like the star quality, right? You're like the person that walks behind the writers. So you do
Yeah.
it because you like it.
But
I
isn't this
mean, I
amazing?
have met a few short story editors that I've sent work to that I've been like, if you were at my magazine, I would fire you. But
Oh man. Um, I, Gretchen, are you Kelly as well at Nightfire?
I am, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm not going to steal the spotlight, but like we are all
Team
Kellys. We're
Kelly.
I
Kellys.
love that.
Um,
Yay!
I am literally pressing send September 2nd on my first manuscript, the first draft of my first manuscript of my first book for Nightfire to Kelly, and I am terrified. So I am taking you both at your word that Kelly is the nicest editor out there, and we have it on record, and that'll be that. So
She's
Yeah.
wonderful. You're in good hands.
she's
Yes.
gonna say, "Can we take that hiking scene out, Clay? Because Wendy already covered that."
That's
Um,
funny. Cut it out with all the hiking is also how I approach lesbianism.
done. Amazing. Wendy, I've been thinking about this a lot, and like maybe because I heard you speak at ALA, but I when approaching Girl in the Creek, there's there's a lot of kind of a confluence of niches and kind of subgenres, and kind of doing my darndest to kind of like kind of explain to someone what this book is. So maybe to kind of start us off, forgive me, I want to ask you if could you do the log line? What is the kind of the elevator pitch of Girl in the Creek, so we can kind of riff from there.
Sure. Well, Girl in the Creek is about a woman who wants to break into true crime writing, and she's heard a lot about some missing persons cases in the Mount Hood National Forest. So she gathers up her like most outdoorsy friends, and they set out to go do some research on the project. And while they are out hiking in the woods, they find the body of a dead young woman whose body then proceeds to vanish from the morgue, and her fingerprints appear at a crime scene along with some very strange mushrooms. I think that's kind of the
That's
breakdown I'm going with.
that's I mean, I'm happy that you said true crime, because I feel like there's this infusion of uh, you know, cosmic horror, Sporror, true crime, and I feel like maybe I'm taking it at face value with the title of just Girl in the Creek. Um, I want to posit something, and I either want you to shoot me down or riff, but like what I really found kind of extremely compelling about the kind of like aperture into the book is that I felt that you are kind of antagonizing the reader's kind of true crime inclinations. That like here we have a body, and this body has been kind of stripped away of certain kind of identifiers. We don't know a name kind of up front. Like it's like there's not much to ID, and in that the reader are kind of like peering in, like we're kind of rubbernecking to this crime scene. But I feel as if like whenever I kind of like lean into my kind of true crime isms, I'm always kind of aware of like a particular voice in my head of like, oh, this feels like there's a certain kind of like profaneness to it, or a certain kind of like there should be this kind of antagonism of our inclinations towards like our desire for imbibing true crime. And I guess my question is that right? Is that like, is this my guilt, or is this the kind of books, like the text itself kind of like showing us a body and then kind of interrogating us, like, why are we looking, why are you, dear reader, looking at this body as closely as you seem to be?
It's kind of interesting because when I first set out to write the book, I just kind of like wrote the story from the POV of like this human character, this person who wants to write this true crime project. And little by little, things started like happening in the back of my head, where I just couldn't stop thinking about the girl they found in the creek. And so when I got the idea of, so one thing that you learn right away with the book, the very first chapter is told from the point of view of this like mycelial consciousness, right? Um, it narrates the parts with the mycelial consciousness. They're basically narrating what's going on with the dead girl, who immediately becomes very interesting character. And despite the fact that she's had like her life and her identity stripped from her, she kind of latches on to the idea of revenge, and she gets some agency because of that. Because, she's been sort of filled with spores of something that kind of can reanimate you in certain ways. Although she's the first reanimation really that you learn in the book. I hope I'm not giving away too much to people. And yeah, like so I didn't like set out to write some kind of commentary about how creepy and weird true crime is. Um, I've never really been like a true crime reader. I think maybe part of it is just like growing up in the Pacific Northwest at a time when, there were a lot of serial killers who were very active. I was, I think I am a little bit fascinated with people who are fascinated by that. Like to me, that just seems like, yikes, why would you want to go there? That's just terrible. But my mom and my sisters are both like super, like really into thrillers and true crime. And so it was just like, what is wrong with you? And I guess there's a little bit of that was like going on in my head.
I mean, you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, correct? Like this has
Yeah,
always been home.
yeah.
I mean,
I just remember like so my sister who's 10 years older than me, like she would have to drive home because she would do like high school and then she'd go work at the Dairy Queen and then she'd have to drive back to our house, which was like 25 miles. And it was like a really windy, narrow road. There's nobody out there. And at the same time, we're hearing about the Santiam killer who's like targeting girls that look like my sister. And like knowing that every single night on her drive home, she's just like totally freaked out.
I mean, is that then kind of baked into your consciousness to the extent that like you look, I mean, if you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, like here's this kind of pristine vista of just lush beauty, and yet there is this undercurrent of something else. Like, is that is that there for you? It's there in the book. So
Yeah,
like
that's pretty much my brain all the time.
you are the dark undercurrent. You're the like the kind of
But
simmering.
I'm just like, I'm always aware, right? Like, there's no better place to hide a body than in the woods, right?
But then to give that body agency, to give it, I mean, I don't want to encroach upon spoilers, so I feel like I'm gonna tread carefully. But given the fact that this body, this girl in the creek, is given a kind of new sense of agency that is in direct conflict with the thing that in of itself gave it, endowed it with that agency, like I don't know, like I guess I'm curious, like was that it felt like an epiphany to me reading it. Like I was like, this is like it's a twist or it's like a pleasant surprise because like I didn't see that coming. And then I guess I'm curious, like, was that always the path? Like were all roads leading towards this, or was it just as much of an epiphany to you?
It was kind of an epiphany for me as well. I got to about the midpoint of the book, and like there was some weird stuff beginning to happen on the page, and I was like, wow, this is way grosser and weirder and more interesting than I thought it was. And that was when I kind of started to realize that, like, on the mushroom side, things were getting more and more complicated.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there's trouble in Mushroomtown.
Forget about it, Jake. It's Mushroomtown.
Oh, I like that.
Speaking about gross and weirder, that's my amazing transition to Black Flame.
Excellent
I
transition. It is gross and weird and magical.
I this is so silly, but like, are you a Brian De Palma fan?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did you see Body Double?
Yes, I did.
My kind of experience as a cis white male reading Black Flame was it kind of like brought me back to the scene in Body Double where you have I can't even remember what the protagonist's name is, but he's like there's the scene within the scene of the that's set to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the relax, don't do it. Like he's like walking, like he's filming a scene, and I think it might have been a porn film, but like he's entering into this kind of lair that just so happens to be, I don't know if it's like a VHS, like a video store, but I've clearly done my research and remember what happens in the scene. But like you get the sense that he's this kind of like goofy, like everyman kind of like walking into a like in a place that he is not either accustomed to or familiar with, and it it's, of course, it's Melanie Griffith to just kind of like lure him in, and it's all set to relax, don't do it. um which is how I feel like I was kind of walking, like reading Black Flame, which is like, oh, like I'm gonna like, here's this cursed film book, and like, oh, this is a great narrative, and like it's written by Gretchen, so like I'll be prepared. And at no point was I safe. But the thing I don't, I want to kind of pay lip service to is like, there is a kinkiness to this book. There is a certain kind of level of arousal to this book that like I'm reading it, and I'm like having these like flashes of just like, oh my, like my prudishness was kind of put on call, because like there's this sense of like, oh my, like I'm licking leather now, and like, oh God, this is like, this feels very like I'm not in Kansas anymore. And I I feel like anyone who enters into a book by you is going to I don't know if preconceived notions is the word, but they're going to be ready. They're going to like, they're going to want it. But I feel like you give them something different or something new with Black Flame. And is there a question there, or am I just kind of like speaking to my own kind of vanilla tendencies? But like, I guess I just want to say, like, I was turned on by Black Flame. This was like, this book was a horny horror book.
Thank you. Thank you. My goal is to be pornographic. That's how it plays to me. A lot of Black Flame is about my early experiences as a lesbian, coming out into a community that I had always wanted to be a part of, and that I had been really on the outside of, looking in for any number of reasons, from my religious upbringing to my gender identity. And there is this tremendous, frightening, overpowering eroticism to finally getting inside, and to stand there trembling with shame and desire in front of another woman. And I really wanted to communicate that experience.
which is wild, because the I, one of the kind of driving, and it's not even driving as much as it is resistance. There's a certain level of resistance in the book, and it's that your main character is kind of struggling against their own kind of repression. And like that tension, I think, is very palpable within the book, of whether it manifests itself in anger or loathing, like, whether it's pointed outward or inward. But that kind of specific tension point that really rides through, not the entirety of the book, but the majority of the book. And it's like you're, I don't know, I'm gonna say this and then I'm gonna ask, but like it seemed as if you're kind of creating this high note of tension that just gets like higher and higher in pitch, so that it inevitably snaps or breaks, and there's this flood. um were you writing specifically towards that levee? Like, was the kind of dam always this thing that was going to collapse, or I don't know, like,
So when I started out, I didn't quite know what the ending was going to be. The first
really?
thing that came to me was the idea of this woman who's so living inside her own memories and inside her own self-loathing that it's suffocating to be inside her head. And her life is taut and anxious and sort of unrelenting to the reader. And I think that does create kind of an irresistible need for things to explode. Nobody wants to see the slack go out of the line. They want to see it whip free and it take off the longshoreman's arm.
Yeah. But I mean, like I'm thinking of Cuckoo and like the expansiveness of that novel. And even in Manhunt, like Manhunt was taut, but it felt like epic. There was like an epic quality to it. And Cuckoo was, I mean, it was your it. Like it felt like it had this kind of like, here is this larger world through the kind of perspectives of this ensemble cast. But Black Flame is like we are in the perspective of this one character. And I mean, it's Black Flame is like 200-ish pages. Like
Yeah.
it is it is a sharp razor, but within that, I mean, I think suffocation is the word, where it's like you're like, as the reader, I'm asphyxiating because of the point of view. And so when you get to the end, which we will not spoil, it's glorious. I mean, maybe it is Inglorious Bastards. It's the kind of like, it is the kind of the release that I don't know that I was aiming for, but I like, it did feel like such a kind of like breath of air, um, and a win, like victory. Um, did you feel that in the writing of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to take everything that had ever made me struggle in life, everything that I've ever seen repeated over and over again in the news or in communities around me, and just wail on it with a hammer
Mhm.
for as long as I could get away with.
But I guess then I'm curious, is like book to book, are these stories kind of communicating with one another in the sense of like, well, the last book was, I think like Cuckoo was like over 400 pages. Like it was a long book. And then
Mhm.
this one feels compact in such a way that I'm curious if there's a volley or a conversation between of like, well, I was here for Cuckoo and now I'm choosing to either do something different or try something new, or I don't know, pivot. Like, are you in conversation book to book?
Absolutely. I wanted to push myself. I wanted to see if I could do something that I'm not inclined to do, which is write from one perspective in a single focused story. And I actually wound up really loving it. I think
Oh,
it's something I'll come back to, but when I sit down and start to come up with a new book, the first thing in my mind is always, well, how does this relate to what I've just done, to what I've done in the past? Is this new? Does it have something new to say? Am I pushing myself enough?
and you're saying a lot in
Thank you.
the expanse of like not a lot of pages. Um, and I mean, I feel like a book has to be profane to exist in this way, uh in this oeuvre, this like body of work that you're creating, you specifically, Gretchen. Like it is like, you know, I know I'm coming to you to be wounded, but I don't know where the injury is going to happen. And this feels like a razor, like is like I don't know, like there's a straight razor coming at me, and there are a lot of cuts, there are a lot of slices in this one, and because Manhunt felt very like there was a kind of like a cudgel to it, like it was like a like kind of the blunt brute force of it, like it doesn't stop, it doesn't let up. Cuckoo, uh, like kind of on the rack and like under the sun for a long time, and birds pecking. But this was I don't unshin endalu, like this is the razor blade over the eyeball. And you're you're throwing the kitchen sink at us, and it feels like a book that has a lot to say. And I guess I'm curious, like, were you kind of cognizant or aware of what the book would be saying when the book would be coming out, and how readers will be receiving it?
Yeah, it was on my mind. And it's always on my mind. Like you say, it's profane. I'm
Mhm.
profane. I love profanity. I love obscenity. I don't ever want the reader to know where I'm going to hurt them. Otherwise, what's the point? What am I doing? You know, when someone picks up one of my books, I want them to cut themselves on it. I want it to hurt them enough to make them think about something. And I hope and I think that what I've chosen to talk to them about is important enough to merit a little pain.
And it's that they keep coming back for more. It's the thank you, Gretchen. May I have another book, please? Um, so yeah, yeah. Who does that say more about? Is it you, or is it a it's like, what's the person who comes up to you and says, you know, it hurts, but I love it.
Well, it takes more than one person to engage in sadomasochism,
There you go. There you go.
usually.
Wendy, you mentioned Sporror, you mentioned mushrooms, and we can't not talk about fungus. I got mushrooms on the mind, and maybe this is the cart before the horse question, but uh, we are living in a Sporror world. It's always been their world. We're just kind of like realizing it now. But like, I'm very curious about, like, what is it like to tap into this kind of, I don't know if resurgence is the right word, but like, we're these are fungal times, at least on the bookshelf in the horror aisle, and I love it. And I guess, like, I'm curious, like, how does it feel to be kind of tapping into this illustrious, lush, lovely little niche that is proliferating?
Well, I started the book like before I re like the very first draft of this book, I stopped at a point and I was like, oh, I guess this new book that I'm reading actually may have something to do with fungi. And that book was Mexican Gothic. Yeah, so
So wait, I'm sorry, timeline that. Like, you wrote the chapter before, like, pre Mexican Gothic, or in the
yeah,
midst of it?
I started this book back in 2020. And it took me some time to get it written and some time to get it sold, but yeah, I mean I sold it to Tor in 2022, so it's just a kind of a long wait.
So was there this kind of preemptive, like, are you copying to having started like, kickstarting the spore trend
Oh no,
before?
I mean I knew like I like submitted an anthology. I submitted a story to an anthology that Sylvia edited years before that. That was about, creepy fungi.
What,
And
the one that, like, was called Fungi, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I did
God, I
not get
love that
in,
anthology.
but that story got published at the Lovecraft Easing. But yeah, so I feel like, and I remember like when I was just getting into writing, reading Jeff Vandermeer's Ambergris
Hmm.
series, which is about
Oh,
an
yeah.
invasion of fungal bad guys. And yeah, so I think it's always with us. It maybe just has a bigger spotlight right now because, this completely unheard of actor named Pedro Pascal, is in this completely unheard of TV show called The Last of Us, based on, only the greatest video game ever made. So I think that's why I think we are like sort of, I think more a little more aware of it right now than usual. And
Yeah.
T. Kingfisher had like a big fungi book last year or the year before, and yeah, but I think it's always around. I
It's
think
always there.
that I just feel like fungi, it can be the most beautiful thing. It can be the most horrific thing. And I think its role as like a breaker downer, like it's a really important recycler of nutrients in the forest. I mean, if it wasn't for fungi, this planet would have been buried under like indigestible lignins and dead trees, like, and we would all just be, smushed under that.
Yeah.
We owe a huge debt to fungi. But I think the fact that we associate it with rot and renewal makes it just way too interesting not to play around when you're a horror writer, right? And
Yeah.
I think we're at a time when there are many things in this world that seem very rotten. Many of our societal structures are just rotten to the core. And I think we're all ready to have like a big mushroom just come along and like wipe the decks clean and start us up with some new stuff.
God, the center will not hold.
Yeah.
But I think it's rare then for stories to take on the point of view of the fungus itself. And I think it's such a marvel to have read about the strangeness in a way that I I myself am kind of like, oh, this is beautiful. And maybe that's my kind of interpretation of Sporror, where it's like there is an inherent natural beauty to it, even as it's consuming, destroying, digesting. Like, there's something so kind of eloquent about the strangeness, which is the name given to the spore, the kind of like pervasive species. So like I want to commend and I want to ask, like, where did the point of view come from? Like, where, how was it writing from the perspective of a coyote or a body? Like these are things that exist within the realm of this book, but you give it such a inherent beauty in its decay. So why? How?
Well, I mean, I was just writing this really fun, really silly book about, kind of like the grown-up Scooby-Doo gang in the woods, they're eating edibles and having adventures. And I think a part of me was like, there was a part of me that maybe was like, you're having too much fun. You should do something hard. And I was like, you're not actually thinking of writing a book, like part of this book from the point of view of like a sentient mushroom, are you? Like that sounds hard, brain. I don't think that's a great idea. And it just kept seeming like that would be more and more interesting. And actually, like by the time I got done figuring out like how everything was going to work out with the people, I was like, I'm so just like I just want to get to the mushrooms. Like that is like the whole reason for writing this book. And I practiced a little. I was a little nervous about how to come up with the POV.
Yeah.
And because there were a couple of different approaches that I could have done. And I sort of settled on this like omniscient sort of thing that sort of like takes all the different life forms that are a part of the creature and give it a chance sometimes to like give little moments to have its own POV. I think there's one chapter where you're in the head of a guy who's part of the hive mind and he's seeing things, but he needs to like get a bigger view on things. So he closes his eyes and he starts seeing, experiencing, like collecting the experience of all the creatures around them. And that was a really fun part to write.
Yeah.
But I started with the coyote. I have a little dog, so like I'm always watching her and like wondering like what is it like inside your head? Like you're such a weird little creature. And there's actually like a lot of science about how dogs' brains work because they're the only animal you can put in an MRI conscious. Like any other creature is like, this is horrible. And a dog is like, get a treat? Okay. Yeah, so we know a lot about like where the parts of a dog's brains are, and not that different from ours really. And we know a lot about how their eyes work. And so I like read up on a lot of this stuff. And first I wrote a short story that was just from the point of view of a dog that had like a computer chip in her head, so she understood English. Um, and that story got nominated for the Theater Sturgeon Award, so I guess it worked out okay. But after I finished that story, I felt good enough about it that I was like, okay, this will be sort of my entry point into like writing from the points of view of like different kinds of minds. So I just had to take that like dog mind, but then dial it up a couple notches by putting it inside the sentient mushroom.
But it is, I mean, at a certain point, the book itself becomes this kind of like hive mind Rashomon, where you have all of these different, you know, it's it is of one body. There's like a kind of connective tissue, and yet within that connective tissue, there is conflict, and that conflict is where, the kind of the conflict, like just the kind of point of views themselves kind of like are telling their own story, uh but still oddly somehow interconnected. And I like, there are moments where I'm just like reading the book and I'm like, oh my god, she's totally there. It's it's now here, but it's like looking, I don't know, like you're taking the camera and putting the camera in front of the mirror, and like the kind of like the refraction of the reflection kind of like going on into infinity, to literal cosmic proportions. um I I I I'm wondering if that was hard. Was it a challenge to track? Like, it's like, oh my God, it's like all of a sudden I've written myself into the book, or like I've like now I have this kind of point of view to contend with. Like, were you were you mapping it out, or was it just like free for all, guys? Like, have fun. I'll follow. Where was
It
your
was
editorial brain during all this? Is the question.
I I was mostly just kind of going on instinct. I had like, I made myself go through and sort out. I'd like written all the human parts, really. Like I got them all hammered out. And then I just sort of thought about like where in that story, if I pause to show you something from this mushroom point of view, what would mess you up the most?
Yeah.
So that was like the entry point, and that was sort of just based on instinct and an idea about like pacing and things like that. But then I think part of what you talked about is, I think that kind of the creature and the way you talk about the way the different parts are sometimes opposed to each other and things like that. I think it's kind of working, it's kind of like a body, right? Like our own bodies are made up of these like very disparate parts, right? Like you've got this inner, like this microbiome inside your intestines, and those little creatures in there, some of them are getting along, some of them aren't, some of them are like, oh yes, please load me up with some dairy products, and then other ones are like, I die when I have dairy, and now you cannot digest peaches for a little while. And there's just so much going on inside of us where the different priorities and different balances are all out of whack. I think I was kind of thinking about that a little bit. And I mean, the natural way of a forest is beings which are deeply and intricately connected in this like web of, you know, nutrients and atoms and everything like that. And I kind of wanted it to be that in the way that I wanted the mushroom creatures to kind of, they were a little ecosystem that is sometimes not in perfect balance, and each part like wants to do its own thing, but it's bound together very tightly. So I think I was
Yeah.
just trying to emulate the forest a little when I was writing it. But I
Yeah.
didn't use a map or anything like that. I have used some like, painstaking spreadsheet kind of action, like hand-drawn spreadsheets, because I wasn't very good at Excel back then. But this, not for this book.
Yeah.
This was just fly by the seat of the pants.
God, it's it's just a beautiful book, and I feel like
It
it
really
is.
is.
Yeah,
Thank you.
right. Like I there's a certain kind of like the inherent kind of like inevitability of our own demise. Like if I'm gonna go, I just want to be a vehicle for some cosmic spore and just like keep keep proliferating. Like there's like a certain kind of like eloquence to the idea of like, well, your autonomy is gone, but look what you are, look what we're giving you. Like you're you live another day through these increments and bits and pieces.
I kind of feel like both of these books are like that, right? Like there's this profoundly horrible thing, but there's incredible beauty all along the way. And at the end, there's something delightful about the
Yeah.
ending of both of these books.
And it's a transformative experience for the body. Uh, it will
Yeah.
not be in the same condition as we found it. Um, uh, you break it, you buy it, and honestly, Wendy, I think that is a perfect capper. I don't think we can top that. So I want to kind of come to a closing point, but this is something that I do or don't do, but I've done before on the show. And I'm really very genuinely curious to hear your responses. And you can be as cheeky or as serious with it as you want. But I have two questions I want to ask both of you. And one of them, and I ask this of all of our guests, more or less, uh, that idea of like, can you remember the first time that you were afraid? Uh, was it watching a movie, reading a book, something that happened to you? Like there's this moment that's kind of a part of the primordial ooze of our artistic upbringings where we were scared of something. And I'm curious if you can either kind of recall the first or a first of something that just, you held on to.
Wendy, do you want to take this one first?
Mhm.
Sure. Um, I grew up with very unfunctional parents, and I had two older sisters, one who was very committed to frightening me. And also, we lived, when I was a little kid, we lived on a ranch in Eastern Washington with many sheep and and like large horses and things. So there's almost a I was probably frightened multiple times every single day when I was a small child. But the you might not believe this story, but it was extremely terrifying. It was the first big scare of my life. And it was winter time. I was probably 3 or 4, and it gets very cold in Eastern Washington. It's like, very sear, gray, deserty with like sagebrush, kind of like, Wyoming kind of looking stuff. And I had gone out to play, and there was a hill where there had never been a hill before over by the barn. And I was really excited about it because it was very large. It was, much taller than me. And I set out to scramble up on this hill. And I'm getting up there. I get to the very top, and the crust breaks through. And I start sinking because they have cleaned up the barn, and it is a giant pile of manure. And I start sinking, and I'm
Oh my
screaming.
God.
And when I first started falling, I was the only person around, and I didn't know what to do. There was nothing to grab onto. There was nothing solid, and I was just being swallowed up by this giant pile of shit. And by the time like somebody grabbed me, which was my mom, I was like, up to my chin, and they had to like yank me out, and it was so terrifying. I really thought I was going to die.
Oh my
Like
God.
because it was like the ultimate, like when you watch that episode of Scooby-Doo and somebody's sinking in quicksand. It was like that. But yeah, just being a tiny kid nearly drowning in a pile of half frozen shit. So that's my first really big scare.
There you go. Uh, you survived. So
Thank goodness.
I have to ask, will that or has that ever appeared in a story? Like that's a great story. Like could that
No, I should
exist in
probably use
something?
it, right? But
Oh my God.
hang on to that one.
Please,
Don't
please, please.
steal that one, Gretchen, or you, Clay.
How about you, Gretchen?
Wow, that really makes mine look boring. Um, in prosaic terms, the first time that I was afraid was almost certainly, and we have a very good relationship now, but when I was younger, my dad was a much less mature person, and he frightened me a lot. Um, he had a real temper, and I remember that living with this like presence of fear that just came and went for reasons that I couldn't understand. But I think the single most emblematic memory of fear that I have from my childhood is going down the basement steps. And our light switch for the basement was at the base of the steps, not at the top. So you would have to feel your way down in the dark. And our house in New Hampshire, my parents bought it when it had burned to the ground, except for a few rooms. And that's how we were able to afford it. And my dad rebuilt it slowly over the course of my childhood. So it was unmortared stone down there that was had been there for close to 200 years. And so you would get snakes, you would get insects, you would get rodents. And there was this a smell in the air of the soil and cold and a little bit of dry rot. Going down those steps, I always felt like something was waiting just on the other side of the rails and it was going to wrap its hand around my wrist any second.
Were okay, so there was the pre-existing property which partially burned down. So
Yeah.
there's the house that was there, and then there's the house that your father built that you all moved into. Was there ever an awareness or like, this is the old house versus I live in the new the new house. Like could you feel the divide between one and the other?
Yeah, I mean, there were parts of the old house that were left standing that were incorporated into the new house. So there was like charred woodwork throughout the house.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
My mind kind of immediately leaps to like what happened to the first house, like to cause it to burn down, and like does that narrative kind of like make its way into the family of like, well, the family who lived here before, like dot dot dot.
It actually was a little bit of a mystery.
Oh my God.
They had left their young daughter home alone, and somehow a fire started, and she was either too scared or too traumatized to explain how, and the fire department had no idea. But the place burned to the ground.
But she lived. The
She
the
lived. Yeah.
the okay. Um, and at no point did your family speak to the ramification, like I'm being cheeky, forgive me, but like the supernatural ramifications of living in a like it's like, well, the house is haunted. Like, did that ever bake its way into family dinners?
No, not really.
Fair enough. The basement is enough. Like honestly, like snakes and insects is enough. Um, but I can't imagine looking at the burned wood. Can't imagine falling into a pile of poop either, but here we are, guys. Um, the last question for the night is as purveyors of fear of kind of giving everybody the willies, uh, can you actually remember maybe one of the first formative times of doing that to another person? Like, was it a story? Was it a prank? Was it something that you did? Like, can you remember the first time that you actually frightened another individual and maybe say, oh, well, maybe there's something here?
I think for me, this was actually pretty late. I was 27, maybe 28, maybe a little younger. And I had just written really my first sort of adult work. I had been finishing books for quite a while at that point, but none of it is really grown up work. It's a lot of derivative stuff and a lot of like sort of exercising my muscles. But I wrote this book about the Wurzburg witch trials, and it's about a wet nurse who gets arrested after the baby that she's caring for dies of dysentery. And she's tortured and executed for witchcraft. And a friend of mine read it and sent me a message about how it had made her want to vomit. And I thought, maybe I could do this professionally. um, and I think it does scratch a similar itch, speaking to earlier, to sadism. There's a desire to not just hurt people, but hurt people that want to be hurt.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, it makes sense of like just the like, oh, I elicit this. Like this is something that like, something that I have created, manifested in you this physical response.
Yeah.
And I want to do it again. And I want to do it again. How about you, Wendy?
Gosh. You know, never, I was like never good at never good at being funny. I was always the kid that like people laughed at, they didn't laugh because of. I was never good at being scary. I never really was any good at that kind of thing. Um, but I've always like really loved horror and loved describing dark, horrible things. But I didn't feel like I was good at it at all. Even though I've like sold a bunch of like horror stories, I knew I wasn't scary. I just, could tell a good story. And then when my third novel came out, it was a science fiction novel. And one of my friends said, Wendy, there's a scene in this book, and I had nightmares about it that night. And I had this sense of elation hearing those words. It was like the best thing I'd ever heard. And after that, I was like, there's no way I'm going to keep writing science fiction. I'm just going horror all the time.
You had written horror before. This was
Like,
just the tipping point to like, okay,
yeah, but I
now.
didn't feel like anything I wrote. I feel like it was more like action adventure with like, some wahaha-ish sort of elements, like I don't think it was scary.
Yeah. And much like the mycelium underneath the table and the floorboards and the house, Wendy crept up on us all and devoured us, and we are just living in Mushroomtown. Um, Guys, I cannot thank you enough. I truly, truly, these two books are. I mean, I read them a while ago, and they're still lingering, and I can't thank you enough for sharing, your stories with them, with me, and with everybody who's listening. So everybody, you have to go out and pick up Girl in the Creek by Wendy Noel Wagner. And you have to pick up Black Flame when it releases. We'll say this week, because it's August. The book,
Yes.
what is 5th? August 5th?
Yeah.
Oh, August 5th. Black Flame by Gretchen Felker-Martin. Um, I thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. This has
Thank you so
been,
much for having us, Clay. This was
This
just
was
a
so
delight.
fun.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's fun to talk about
wonderful.
books you love. Like this is amazing. Like these are books that I genuinely, I don't know, I just love them. I fucking love them. So there you go. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. This has been Fearmongers, and yeah, we'll do it again.
Thank you.
It was so nice meeting you, Wendy.
It was great meeting you, Gretchen. You're amazing.